Hello?
All right. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Martin Willis, your host. It's actually a sad day in ufology today. We lost a great icon, Stanton Friedman. And so the first part of this show is going to be dedicated to Stan, and actually we'll take calls, later on in the show. People want to talk about their experience with Stanton or their thoughts. We'll have that available as well. I actually was messaged this morning early from a guy named Garrett on Facebook. He saw something on Reddit about 7 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. And ends up, we thought it was just a rumor, a hoax. I called Kathleen Martin, and she had no idea. And later on found out it was indeed the truth. So Alejandro and I are going to be talking a bit about our experience with the great Stanton Friedman over the years. And I want to thank everyone for listening, and I want to thank everyone that supports the show. And this whole show is going to be in the free category of my shows, so anyone can listen. And welcome to the show, Alejandro.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Sad day, huh? Sad day.
Yeah, it is a really sad day. I mean, like you, I woke up to an email from a family member, someone claiming to be a family member of Stanton's.
Right.
And like you, I was doubtful because this has happened before where people have claimed. And fortunately, I was able to call Stanton, and he answered the phone, and I told him, hey, rumor is that you've passed away. And he's like, no. But this time, unfortunately, when I called, he wasn't answering the phone. And yeah, and that's about the time that you texted me. And then so we got a hold of Kathleen, and we were able to confirm it with the family and other family members. So yeah, it turned out to be real, unfortunately. And actually, I got a hold of my friend Lori, because I don't think I've even shared this part with you. So Kathleen, one of the things a family member told me was that he passed on his way back from an event.
Yeah, in Toronto.
Yes, in Toronto with Nori. And it's my friend Lori Wagner who arranges those. So I called her earlier today, and she, of course, was super sad. And I guess what had happened is that she, they invited him to come out and talk at this event with Nori. Everybody had gone home, but his flight was delayed 24 hours.
Oh.
So he was doing fine. He was at home reading a book on Obama, and he was just going to stay home in the room for the day, relaxing. And the next day, the flight did leave, and then at the airport is where it happened. He had a heart attack, and sadly, at the airport.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's something else. It took quite it was several hours before, from the time that I heard about it originally after Garrett had messaged me until, and Kathy was saying she was waiting to hear from him. And
right.
It took several hours for her to find out with all the people she knows connected. They were very, very close.
Yeah, and I guess, I was surprised. How could I be told before Kathleen? But I didn't. I'm not sure who this family member was. I'd never heard of them before. And, the family, she was having a hard time getting a hold of them. But that, of course, was because they were actually trying to get a hold of other family members before the information was released. So
yeah,
there's still a mystery how the information kind of got released that this had happened.
That is strange, on Reddit of all places. But I do want to say that Kathy did tell me that she is, that the family is really looking for their privacy to be respected, and that if any media wants to talk to anyone, to contact her. And if someone's listening to the show and they're involved in the media and need to contact Kathy Martin, just message me. My information is right on Podcast UFO. I'd be glad to pass the information along. But she does want to make sure that people do respect the privacy of the family, and that's what they requested. So,
yeah.
And
so I guess, Stanton was older. He had a heart attack in the past. Thinking about it today, it's kind of like, I think in a way he was in a bit of denial. He was told everybody he retired last year, even at Roswell. Fortunately, I did these interviews because the last year at Roswell was supposed to be his last. So I did a couple, Stanton's last interview at Roswell, but he didn't want to quit. So the director was even like, you know what, we're going to get him back. And they did. Stanton committed to come back to Roswell, and he was going to be there this year. So it's kind of a good thing. We thought it would be his last, so we could, get in at least some goodbyes or at least get some interviews and things like that in before he left. But, he kept going even after he had that heart attack a couple years ago. And all of us, I think, felt, he's so bright. I talked with Jim Harold, who does paranormal podcast, and he said that he last night or this weekend, he was there in Toronto, and Stanton was witty and bright as normal, and he's just shocked, and I think that's all of our experiences, those of us who got to spend time with him. Last time I was with him, I think was Big Bear just a couple months ago in California, and he was, just as delightful and cheerful and bright, answering people's questions and just right there, so intelligent. And he was definitely a very special person, in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky enough to, I did the retirement show with him, but that was last October, and he kind of refused to quit. He kept going as in the very last day. He was at, at that speaking engagement. So I think he was kind of changing his mind on retiring, and he loved doing it. So
yeah.
And
I guess before he even while I was talking with Kathleen and we're trying to figure out what was going on, she said that he kind of was thinking, "Wow, I'm really tired, and maybe I shouldn't have booked this gig." And she was saying, "You know what? You got to cut it out. You've got to really cancel all the other traveling that you have booked." Of course, he had the UFO Congress. We're going to honor him there.
That's right.
And he had a couple other things he was going to be doing, and she was like, "No, you can't do that." And he agreed. He was like, "You're right. This is just too much for me." So it sounds like he was not going to do any events after this one anyway, because he really was feeling it. And it's unfortunate he didn't make it, through this one. But at the same time, I think a lot of us feel this way, that we want to keep doing what we have a passion for until the end. And that's what he did.
Yeah, that's right. I'd like to, one of the things I would like to play quickly here is he had a sense of humor. So, and so this is very surprising that he would do this. But years ago, back in 2000, I think 14 or 15, I made my Podcast UFO website into a spoof for April 1st, April Fool's Day. So I called Stan. I said, "Hey, Stan, can you know how you always say flying saucers are real?" I said, for April Fool's Day, can you do a little spoof on that? So I called him up, and I'm going to play the clip now. Alejandro and anyone else, I don't know if they're going to be hearing this on I know they'll hear it on YouTube, but I'm not sure if we're going to be hearing it on KGRA radio. You know what I'm going to do? Because of that, I'm going to save it till the break, because I know the people on YouTube will hear it. So I'll wait for that.
You know what you could do? Because I've done this before, and it seems like, silly, but it works. Is just play it off your phone and put the phone next to the microphone.
Oh, I can't do that now. I have it loaded on OBS. But anyway, yeah. So we'll continue. But one of the things I want to say about Stan as a person and not just his great integrity and his try to stick to the facts. I know there's a little controversy here and there about a couple things he was very interested in, but still, is he was always approachable. You think about at every conference I've ever seen Stan, he's right there in the front with Kathy usually beside him, Kathy Martin, and you can walk right up. Anyone can walk right up. He was not in any way snoot of any type. He was very open to talking to anyone about anything, and he's going to be missed at all the conferences. I think about the International UFO Congress. You walk in the door, and there he is with Kathy Martin.
Yeah, we would put him right up front.
Yep.
You're right. And not only that, he would do so many events. He was so open to talking to anyone about anything, and he would do so many events. And I think that, another thing Jim Harold said, that sure, Stanton looks tired at some of these events, especially lately, but he's like, I'm in my 40s, and so am I, and I feel the same way. But I feel tired. I feel just as tired as him. But, he always kept going. And it's kind of been funny with him, and is that he pretty much never says no to any request to appear somewhere. He's kind of settled down a little bit over the last few years, but especially for the longest time, anytime anybody asked him to speak, he would come do it, and he would talk to people. Like he said, he's done thousands of lectures, anywhere from a group of, rocket scientists, because he has done lectures at NASA or near NASA facilities, to schools, to children. I mean, he did such a huge variety of different talking to different groups, and a person of really high integrity. Of course, people like to say Dr. Stanton Friedman, and that was one of his pet peeves. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. Yeah. Which was good that he would clarify, because not everybody does that, and some people have gotten in trouble for that sort of thing in the past. But he was just extremely unique. He was one of the more credible, intelligent, witty, and great speakers and researchers in this field, and also one of the most prolific on top of that, not just in the number of talks he does, but the number of books he's written.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, the number of ways he's unique is almost endless.
Right. And I, some people would say, I would get some feedback. Someone would say, well, he says, more or less the same thing every time he's on my show. And I don't think anyone has ever been on the show more than him. But you know what? And they would say at the end, but I love him anyway, and I love to hear it. He did say a lot of the same things repeatedly, but people still love to hear it because they, made a lot of sense what he was saying.
Yeah, his taglines were great. I use them and probably will use them forever. Noisy negativist, gray basket, some of these other terms that he used.
SETI. What was a SETI he used?
Oh, I don't even remember. Yeah. But,
stupid something.
All the way back when I was doing Colorado MUFON, and we were doing these, we hosted the MUFON symposiums for a few years in a row back in the 90s or early 2000s. And people would complain, you have Stanton every year. But we would do surveys to ask, who would you like to see at the symposium? And every year, Stanton was at the top of the list. So we would tell people, well, people want to see him. He's at the top of the list in the survey. So maybe he is saying the same thing every year, but people want to hear it every year. So as long as he's the top of the list, we're going to keep bringing him back because he deserves it and he's great. And, he always, especially in relation to MUFON, he was one of the main contributors. He had a column that he wrote for the journal for decades, I think. Every year you've got your Stanton article in there. So people loved him.
Now, when did you actually first meet him? When can you remember meeting him for the first time?
Oh, this is a pretty funny story. Of course, I was starstruck like everybody else. Oh, and I have another starstruck story actually related to the symposiums for after that. But the first time I met him, I was with Colorado MUFON still, I remember, and he was doing a talk for one of the big, and I wish I could remember the name, but essentially downtown Denver, everybody's got their really cool, every town has their cool premier bookshop, bookstore that's just fun and has a fun feel and everything. And we had one in downtown Denver. It's still there. It's like 2 or 3 levels, big place. It has this great feel. It's a really cool place. It's almost like the heart of Denver. It's been there forever. Even, now it's been built up and Denver's really pretty downtown and everything, but it wasn't always like that. But this bookstore's always been there. And so he was speaking at the bookstore, and all of us at Colorado MUFON came out there to support him. And I asked him, can I auto-record his talk? And he said, sure. This was the first time I met him, but he's like, how are you going to do that? I think this was probably around 2000. And at the time I was using a mini disc because, this is before all the digital technology and stuff. And I showed him, I've got this mini disc player. It sounds great. I've got this little microphone. And he's like, wow, that's amazing. He was amazed by the technology and that I could actually record his talk with these little devices. So that was really fun. I thought that was really cute and everything. So that was the first time I had met him. Later on, even within a couple of years, we were doing these symposiums like I talked about. And this is just another fun story of someone else being starstruck and kind of the importance of Stanton. So I sent out press releases because Stanton's speaking at the symposium in Colorado and Denver, and I got a call from CBS, and they were like, hey, we'd love to do some interviews, send a reporter out there. He was actually the reporter. He's like, I'm going to be out there. And I was talking about some of the speakers and stuff, and he kind of said under his breath, he asked, can I talk to this person or that person? And I said, sure, definitely, we'll arrange that. And he said, it'd be great if I could talk to Stanton. And I said, well, of course you could talk to Stanton. And he was like, are you kidding? And I said, no. He's like, Stanton, the guy on TV, the main guy always talking about UFOs. He's, nuclear physicist. I was like, yeah. He's like, I can actually interview him. And I was like, of course you can interview him. That's the whole point. That's what, that's what we want you to do. And he was so floored, this guy. He had to be in his 30s. But, he was a local CBS. And he was so excited to be able to interview Stanton. So that just showed the reach that he had and the credibility, especially, in the 90s and early 2000s. That was some of the worst time for UFOs. All of the documentaries ended with debunking everything they had just presented. And, it wasn't taken very seriously. But Stanton was. He was that guy that was out there. He was the face, the credible face of ufology out there for all of us. And, he's... because he did such a great job. In later years, we've had a lot more personalities that have kind of come forward and that are doing the television shows. And television shows, there's been more and more of them, especially as MUFON, got to be more popular. But, he was the guy.
I remember him having a conversation with him about, the controversy that comes up a lot is people that think that or just assume that, certain people make a ton of money when it comes to UFOs. And I brought it up and he started laughing. So in that case, he'd given me, a bunch of examples of why you don't make a lot of money or make any money. And you got to think about this. He gave up a career that is a high paying career to do this. I mean, that's really saying something right there.
Yeah, and he was doing amazing things. I mean, a lot of what he was working on were like propulsion and, cutting edge sort of things. So, and that's why he got into this. For instance, would it be possible for us to have a little power plant, nuclear power plant on a little craft or a spacecraft? Currently, it's technically illegal, but, not like really. The United States cares too much about that. They're still working on that sort of thing. But his point was there are some, they've done this on planes, and of course we have this on submarines, but that was kind of a specialty of his. And so he was very well versed, at least on the cutting edge propulsion and power plants for that we would be able to use. So he moved, from that sort of thing to eventually, being the UFO guy, We talked to Lee Spiegel. I think you said you're going to have Lee call in. But Lee Spiegel, when he organized the UN talks in the late 70s, if you look at some of those images, you see Stanton in there. Even back then in the late 70s, he was an important figure when it came to all of this. So, yeah, he's been an important guy for so long.
Yeah, I should also I finish my thought here and what I was saying about what he said about the money. I remember him saying when, I don't know how many times he was on Larry King, but many, many times. And I said, and he said, for instance, he said, I got my airfare and hotel paid for, but I had to pay for food. So not only did he not get paid for being on Larry King Live, but he had to even pay for his own food. And there is a lot of that, and a lot of people don't realize, there's
it is frustrating because, you hear even to this day, the whole idea, especially behind Roswell, that all of these Roswell researchers are pushing this whole concept because they're making money off of books. Like they're making tons of money. And, I've been speaking for at least 12 years every year at the Roswell event with the premier Roswell researchers, like the Stanton Friedmans, Kevin Randall, and, Don Schmidt and all those guys. They are not making tons of money. And, one of the organizations that perhaps make the most off the whole Roswell phenomena is a museum. But if you go to the museum, I know these people very well. They're wonderful, really cool, hard workers. They're not rich. If you go to the museum and you're touring the museum, you do not get the sense that you're in this expensive hub of, of where all this money's coming in. You get the sense that this is kind of something cobbled together by a bunch of people who are interested in this field and that are keeping this going because of that interest, and that's more accurate. It's not a humongous flow of cash that's flowing through all of this stuff. So,
right. You know what? I'm just our poor guests are on the phone line with their lines muted, and I forgot to tell at the beginning who my guests were. Of course, it's on YouTube.
Yes,
yeah. I have Gordon Lore, and old-time researcher from NICAP way back in 1965. I think he joined NICAP. And Barry Greenwood, which has been at it forever, since the 1960s. Those are both my guests. But anyway, I wanted to also say this. If anyone has a quick story they'd like to call in about Stanton Friedman, I'm going to put the number up on the line here, and you're welcome to call in and give us that quick story if you have one. If not, we will take calls at a later point in the show, in the second part of the show later on, and anybody could share their experience. And unfortunately, Lee is going to be on the train. He won't be able to call until later on in the show, but he did want to call in. But so that number's up on YouTube if anyone wants to call in. If you're listening on KGRA Radio, that number is 603-967-4030. If you have a story about Stanton Friedman you'd like to call in. Otherwise, we're going to go just a little bit longer before I bring our guests on the show. So, yeah, all good thoughts about Stan. Like you said, he I can't ever remember. Now, I will tell you, he was the very first person I asked to come on my brand new show, episode number 1, and he never responded. I get that because it's a brand new show. But after I got my show going, I think 4 or 5 in, he has never once said that he wouldn't be on my show. Anytime I ever asked him, he said, sure, and so I was always, that's why I had him on, over and over many times over the years.
That's why it was, a concern when I didn't hear him answer his phone this morning, because he also almost always answers his phone. Yeah. Or at least gets back to you very quickly. I mean, he's really excited about this. And, and people will say, well, Alejandro, I know you're always talking about MJ-12 and Doty and all this stuff, and that you're a skeptic of all of that, but Stanton, because I get this quite a bit. But, this was another unique thing about Stanton. Stanton did not hold a grudge or hold it against people when they had a different point of view. Even with like Seth Shostak or Michael Shermer, he loved debating those guys. Yeah. That was like his favorite thing. And when I first started researching all of that stuff and started asking him about it years ago, in fact, I had an interest, probably the first time I met him, I asked some questions back when I was really trying to dig into some of that stuff. And when I really started to find some stuff and disagree, he's like, let's debate. Let's talk about it. He was so excited to debate. And people probably heard, I've got some podcasts in there where we did debate and we got really into it on some different parts. In fact, I've got a piece about Doty where I interview him and we're debating, some different parts and he's sharing his perspective because I definitely wanted his perspective shared. He's done the most work on this. And he was so excited to debate. And not only that, he would not hold grudges. He was very nice about it. As soon as you're done with your conversation, he'd be so happy and energized and he'd be like, hey, that was a lot of fun. It's so different from how most people, especially in this field, are. It's that spirit that certainly I try to bring to the Open Mind UFO Forum group where I'm like, debate is fine. I don't want everybody to have the same opinion as me. That's how we learn. And it's kind of interesting. People get so frustrated. Oh, that guy doesn't believe this or that. But nobody in this field believes the same stuff. You and I do not agree on everything. Me and Lee, or some of my other, good friends in this field, me and my girlfriend certainly do not agree on everything. We all have our different viewpoints, and that's okay. And it's okay for us to be able to debate. And Stanton was absolutely a shining example of how you can disagree about the facts on topics that are important like this, but you can debate them and talk about them and not have to hold a grudge or demonize each other or think poorly of one another because of your differences in opinions.
Well, I think, we had you and I had a little conversation earlier. And a good example of him being such a gentleman is the Jeremy Corbell, Bob Lazar,
right,
and his debate, and how he just maintained this, a stature, and he was he was a gentleman. And I know that in talking to Seth Shostak, I tried to actually set up a second debate with Stanton and him, and he wouldn't do it. And the reason he wouldn't do it because I don't think he fared too well. And Seth is a bright man, very bright. But I don't think in that particular case he fared too well in their debate. I think Stan made a lot of really excellent points that
right,
and why he didn't want to come back.
Some of Stan's great points is, hey, Seth, I gave you that book.
Yeah, that's right.
You made a point. Did you read it?
Yeah.
No.
It's on my, what did he say? It was on my bedside table. He
right,
never
exactly.
Read it.
Yeah, I never read it.
Funny.
So, I mean, yeah, that's why Seth obviously did not educate himself. Maybe he didn't feel he had the time, or he obviously didn't prioritize it. And so, Stanton always had a great argument. How can you debate on these points if you're not even educating yourself on them, which is a great point to make.
Yeah. Well, Alejandro, thank you so much for joining me in this little tribute for our good friend Stanton. He'll be sorely missed, won't he?
He'll be greatly, greatly missed. I mean, he's a unique, special individual, and, we're not going to have anybody like him again. Regardless of what field he would have been in, I think he would have been a unique and special addition to that field. So we are very lucky to have him, and we're very lucky, especially you and I, to spend so much time with him on and off the air.
That's right. Alejandro, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you next week.
Talk to you later.
All right. So our guests this evening, we have both Gordon Lore and Barry Greenwood. And I'm going to just bring them on right now, and we'll talk about their long and very great, interesting backgrounds. Hey, Gordon. Hey, Barry. How are you?
Greenwood here. I'm okay. Gordon here. How are you?
I'm glad you said Gordon here because we got to figure out who is who at this point. You're both on the phone.
No.
Yeah. And so I wanted to welcome both of you, and we'll start with you, Gordon. Gordon, can you... in a nutshell, if you would, for our listening audience, give your background, if you would, and how you got interested in this field. I've learned all about that. I think it's pretty interesting. And then, Barry, it's your turn.
Sure. Okay, Gordon here. I'm not sure I can do it in a nutshell, but what happened was that I was a folk song singer back in Washington, D.C. in the early 1960s. And in 1965, I sung at the the Unicorn Cafe back there during the folk song craze. As a matter of fact, Peter Yarrow of the Peter, Paul, and Mary trio applauded me in one of the songs I sang. And Richard Hall, who was the assistant director of NICAP at that time, was there in the audience, and he invited me back to his apartment. And by the end of the evening, I played some folk songs for him, and by the end of the evening, I'd been hired as a staff member for NICAP. Now, I had previously read the first two books by Major Donald E. Kehoe, who wrote the first book ever on the real, authentic flying saucer phenomena called The Flying Saucers Are Real, as well as the first article ever on it. I understand that article, I think it was a True magazine, but I'm not sure. It is recognized as being one of the 3 or 4 most widely read articles in the history of American publishing. So sorry to be long-winded about my credentials.
No. Also, let's talk about you had some UFO sightings too.
Yeah, I had 2 of them, which is how I really got started in reading more and more about NICAP. And the first one was, I had 3 actually, but they're all in the book. Do you want me to describe them to you?
Yeah, just again, of course we got to bring Barry on as well, but yeah, go ahead if you would.
Yeah, well, I'll try to make it as short as I can. But the first 2, I was on a half-mile-long pier jutting out into the Chesapeake Bay where I lived at the time, when I saw this. It was right across the way from the Patuxent Naval Air Station, where the astronauts still train to this day. And this was the summer of 1955. I saw this huge object that came in out of the bay and then went down into the water and came back up and flew over the pier where I was standing. And I was alone at the pier. It was late at night, and unloaded a bunch of water all over me and then flew away. Now, I checked at the Patuxent Naval Air Station the next day, and they said they had nothing like that up and flying. But the second report that I had was in April of 1959, just before I was entered the Army, and I was coming down from my music lessons at the Peabody Conservatory American in Baltimore, and I happened to see this large object that was in the sky, and it hovered over a barn. And then, while it was hovering over a barn, another object came and joined it. Then the 2 objects made lightning-quick traverses across the sky, back and forth. It, almost like they were playing celestial pinball or something. And then it stopped again over another barn on the left side of the road, and then the smaller object went up and seemed to merge with the larger, what I would call a mother object. And then the third sighting I had was just before I entered the Army in 1959, which I saw this large cigar-shaped object over the Patuxent River, and that was joined by 3 other objects, and then all of the objects took off straight up into the air and disappeared at incredible speeds. So now it's Barry's turn.
Yeah, all right. You heard him, Barry. Your background, please. And you and I are not really that far apart, and I do want to say that eventually we'll do the show and together. I'll come down to where you live, and we'll do a video, YouTube, and then audio podcast together at some point.
Well, yeah, you're next town over from me where you work, I understand, right?
A lot of the time, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Once a week, right.
Well, as far as sighting reports go, I can't really attribute my interest to any particular UFO sightings. I've seen lights in the sky, and they were odd, but certainly nothing dramatic as Gordon describes. But it seemed like I had a hardwired interest in space mysteries and space travel. I was growing up during the Mercury era and the first rocket launches of men into space, and I was fascinated with that, but UFOs really didn't touch on me until about 1964 when there was a widely reported incident at Socorro, New Mexico. And it hit the papers, and I looked at it and I said, wow, a police officer sees a egg-shaped object with men around it, and it was treated in the press like a very serious incident. And I thought, gee, for the first time, there were credible individuals involved with the subject. I was too young then. I couldn't remember anything much from the 50s, but that was the first really impactful story on me. So from then on, I felt I had to look into this more, and I assembled information on it. And even though it was the 60s, where there was a very large wave of sightings in the middle of the decade, it wasn't always easy to find information, especially older information on it. So I hit libraries and wherever I could to bone up on the subject. And over time, I felt it's not so easy to find material on this. I have to do something about that. And I thought of collecting the literature on the subject and putting it under one umbrella, which meant my home, and trying to figure this out. So that's what got me started into not only inquiries into the subject, but trying to document much of it.
And 1964, the Socorro, that was definitely one to get anyone started on the subject. Ray Stanford listens to the show. He may be listening tonight, and he was instrumental in getting that story out. He was there right after, and yeah, that is one of the top stories, I think, and I'm sure sparked a lot of people's interest. Like you said, such a credible witness, someone that didn't want to be a witness. Obviously, it was very obvious. And yeah, that's a good one.
It became evident there was more to the subject than after Socorro. 65, 66, there were huge waves, and it really brought the subject into the forefront.
Right. Gordon, did you want to say something? Were you trying to say something?
I second Gary's notion there completely, because I have a full chapter in my book, Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth, about the Socorro case, and that was one case that Major Kehoe, that along with the Barney and Betty Hill case of 1961, and one was an abduction case, and the other was seeing these creatures beside the saucer that the Socorro policeman saw. That was very impressive. Even Kehoe was impressed by it, but he didn't want the word to get out about these cases because he was trying so hard to try to get Congress to take a serious interest in the subject.
Wow, that's interesting. Barry, going back to, you just mentioned it was active in 1965. Now, I don't know if you were always in New England like you are now, but I do recall, I'm a little bit younger than you, but I do recall in like the mid '60s that there was kind of something going on in New England. I want to call it a flap. Would that be accurate?
Yes. My recollection was I started picking up several newspapers each day at the time to see if this topic was being covered in more detail than what I was able to find prior to that. And I ran across in January of all times. Usually winter's not a good time for UFO sightings, but there was an outbreak of reports from Virginia, and it was quite large. It went on for several weeks. The wire services only touched on it in spurts, but as I found out later, it was a very widespread sighting flap. And that seemed to generate more interest during that year, so that I think when June and July rolled around, New England had an outbreak of reports, and in conjunction with reports around the world. But they were particularly focused in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and they were covered by the local press.
Now I'm gonna ask first you, and then I'm gonna ask Gordon this story. It's because I know of a situation in Massachusetts where they saw a triangle early on, a triangle UFO. So Barry, first to you, when is the first time you ever heard of that configuration as far as a UFO in a triangular form?
Triangular. I probably heard of the shape going way back even into the 50s, but
Really?
I'd be
Wow.
pressed right now to pick a particular incident. I recall hearing about all sorts of shapes being spotted. There was one in Brockton, Mass, back in the, it was early 80s or so, an object shaped like a home plate in baseball was seen by two reporters. And
Right.
they talked about it on the news.
Yeah, that's right. They were both together. The reporters were together. Yeah. They were I don't know. I want to say not coming from a bar or something, but they were coming from somewhere. I do remember that story. Yes. They drew a picture of it. There was a picture of it. It looks like a home plate for sure. Yeah, that's an interesting.
Yeah, and it was in the Brockton paper too, and it got a lot of attention for them at the time. Not all of it wanted, I guess, because as usual there was ridicule from some quarters, but the credibility of the guys was unquestioned. They were very serious about it.
Mm-hmm. And Gordon, what about you? Do you recall? Did you ever hear when you were involved? I know you were involved early on with NICAP. Did you ever hear of a triangular form?
Oh yes, yeah, even that early, and there have been many triangular form sightings. I can't tell you offhand the details of many of them because my elderly memory is not what it used to be. But yeah, I'm sure there were plenty of those back then.
Yeah.
But I did want to also recommend Barry's book, Clear Intent, which he wrote with Larry Fawcett, called The Government Cover-Up of the UFO Experience, which, and Barry's doing a wonderful job of archiving the UFO topic as well, so I just wanted to get that in. But yes, there have been
thank you, Gordon.
of shaped cases.
Yeah. The reason I was basically bringing that up to both of you is because, a lot of people will say today, when the topic of triangle UFOs comes up, they'll say, well, it's most likely a secret government project. And, but you have to discount that when you go back to the decades back because the technology obviously hasn't shown its...
Well, I'll say this about it. I don't recall it being a dominant theme back then.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't around in the 50s, but the 60s, I recall flying saucers, flying discs, formations of objects and all. They were generally egg-shaped or roundish or disc-shaped. Triangles were rather scarce until much later.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, he's right.
So, all right, Gordon, so to you, talk a little bit about what it was like being part of NICAP. And first of all, what does NICAP stand for the new listener?
It stands for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. And it was co-founded by Major Don Lee Kehoe, who wrote the first article and the first book on the subject in late 1956. And then he took over as the director of NICAP in January of 1957 and remained in that position until I think we were ousted by CIA influences at the end of 1969. At least Kehoe and I were summarily fired back then.
Wow.
And so that's pretty much it as far as that particular situation goes. Yeah.
Now, when that
I agree with
Go ahead.
For Kehoe, and also I want to mention Dr. James E. McDonald too. I mean, along with Stanton Friedman, McDonald was he gave up a lucrative career too, pretty much, so he could become a real a real icon in the UFO subject as well.
Yeah, that was a sad day when he had an early passing.
I know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he had, I guess, a bipolar problem and committed suicide.
Right.
But Ann Druffel's excellent book, Firestorm, tells the story of McDonald, and I'm sure it's still being sold out there somewhere.
Yes, I had Allison, her daughter, on the show. What an interesting family they have, and she was telling stories about growing up and, answering the phone and, it's for you, Mom. Someone was talking about aliens in their backyard or something.
I spent many a day at her beautiful home in Pasadena, California, helping her with the Jim McDonald book. Jim McDonald was a very good friend of myself, and particularly Dick Hall. I don't think Kehoe was in contact with him very much, but he had great respect and whatnot for McDonald. Matter of fact, McDonald wrote the introduction to our Project Grudge and Blue Book report. First time I think the Freedom of Information Act was ever used to in a UFO context.
Interesting. So while I have you, that I'm speaking with you right now, what happened after you were fired? What did you do? Did you still stay interested in the field, or did that tarnish it?
Well, it tarnished it a little bit, but I recovered a few months later and started my own organization called the UFO Research Associates, UFOR. And Barry Greenwood was kind enough to say that he had every copy of UFOR for the next 10 years and has scanned them in and is keeping them for future research by UFO researchers and investigators, which I was very grateful for.
Wow. Interesting. And so a lot has changed. I guess this is a question for both of you that I'm going to ask. A lot has changed, I think, in this field just over the last year since. What do you both think about, one at a time, but what do you think about the Pentagon actually admitting their research into the UFO topic?
You mean the AATIP business?
Yeah. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting development. There have been many false alarms in the past about large UFO revelations from government. So I approached this the same way, with a bit of caution as to where the information was coming from and where it might be going. I mean, on the surface, it seems credible because you had a guy who was provably involved with this organization inside Louis Elizondo, and you had several videos involving Navy personnel spotting strange objects and all. And New York Times covered it. The Times historically has been very skeptical about UFOs, so it was rather interesting that they would choose that topic at that time. It suggested that this was a very credible story, and it seems like it, but there are also questions that have to be asked about these developments, because I'm still not satisfied as to the provenance of the story. That was an important thing for me when I had done Clear Intent in 1984, where we were gathering documents from government agencies, and we had to assure the public that these were not false papers from whoever. We insisted on cover letters and a clear line of succession for where these things came from. In the case of AATIP and all, there's some line of succession, but it's broken. There's still things unsaid, like the FOIA requests that were put in for these and had them released, but we're not clear on how far back they go into the agency and why the decisions were made to release those. And several of the films seem to have been out prior to the time when FOIA requests were made. So I have questions about that. They turned up on websites, one overseas,
Right.
I understand.
Germany, yeah.
Yeah. And then the paperwork, official documents on this. I think one was
The
released.
D-1910. It's called the D-1910.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and there was an executive summary that was issued, which, again, seems interesting on the surface, but it lacked that cover story, the cover letter that we always wanted for these documents. And I'd really like to know where these things came from first before having a much confidence in them. Now, these folks are going to have a chance to give their case at the end of the month.
Oh, who's got the train?
That's Gordon.
That's Gordon. Gordon, can you hit your mute on your phone, please, for a minute?
I'm afraid that's the
I thought we were being attacked.
I thought that was like a lunch break or something.
Wow.
The whistle. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that was interesting.
Well, anyway, this series is coming on at the end of the month.
Yes.
Where they're going to give their case for all of this developing, and I look forward to it with two open eyes.
Well, I'll tell you, I help out the history.
Yeah, I like that.
Just
do that when you get through there.
Yeah. So, Gordon,
Okay.
just 1 minute. So I help out the History Channel a little bit. I'm going to help them promote this, and the producer of that's going to be on the show. And hopefully Lou Elizondo will be on within a few months. I'm attempting to do that. And I would like to be able to ask him those hard questions because, I get a lot of email from a lot of people and on this. And I really would like to know that we're not being led down some path, but I was also getting to the point where the History Channel has given me a screener login and all that, so I watched the first episode of Unidentified, and it's really the best show that I've actually seen on UFOs on TV, I think. I was really, really happy after I watched it. I mean, that it was so well done. It's just extremely well done, and it's fascinating. The show's really good. I think it's going to be real good.
Well, we shall see.
Excuse me for butting in, but is that the one that Tom DeLonge of the Bling was excited about?
Well,
it's identified inside America's UFO investigation for the History Channel.
Yeah, but you can sort of take Tom DeLonge out of the picture a little bit. He is he is instrumental in a lot of things, but he is in the story just a little bit here and there. He's on the show just a little bit, but he also because of the issue that he had on an interview that didn't go well. He's kind of kept with Joe Rogan. He's kind of kept in the background a little bit. So, but yeah. No, we are going to go to break, and how the break's going to work here is. If you two gentlemen could mute your phone for a few minutes, I'm going to play that clip. You gentlemen will not be able to hear the clip at all. That's why I'm going to ask you to mute your phones until you hear me talk again. But we're going to go to break right now. So over at KGRA Radio, thank you so much, and hang in. We'll be right back right after these messages.
We're clear, Barton. We've got 4 minutes in this break.
4 minutes. Okay, I'm going to play the clip, so you guys go ahead and mute. And this clip, what I wanted to do to give a little bit of an intro is Stanton Friedman. I called him right before I did an April Fool's website joke in the UFO field. So this is the clip, so take a listen to it. It's pretty funny, actually. I asked Stanton to give me a April Fool's show, a little clip, and this is what he did. Hi, Stan. How you doing? Thanks for coming back on the show.
Well, I'm glad to be on. I just want to make sure everybody realizes that, there really aren't any unidentified flying objects. That's a great story. It's exciting, but it's fiction. You know that. I know that. What the heck?
You mean all these years, Stan?
Hey, did I tell you I won an Academy Award for acting?
What about Roswell? We were just talking about Roswell.
Hey, they needed a new industry down there. The museum has filled the needs of the town. They've got new motels, new businesses. It's a successful retirement community. All thanks to me, and they don't even pay me a share of the profits from my stories.
Wow. What about the noisy, negative, whatever you always say?
Well, there are noisy negativists out there, but that's beside the point. There are many other cases that are great. We don't need Roswell. Nice town, nice place to visit. Gets hotter than heck in the summer. But, if you want an honest education, go to a real school or a real museum.
Okay, so what you're basically saying is flying saucers aren't real. Is that right?
They're not real in the sense that the noisy negativists talk about them, that's for sure.
Okay, well, you heard it from the horse's mouth. Everyone go home. This has all been just a bunch of bull. Anyway, last podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. This is it. Goodbye. Let's see. Does anyone have a podcast on leprechauns? Oh, I'm going to check that. All right, and welcome back. So this is Martin Willis, Podcast UFO, and my guests are Gordon Lore and Barry Greenwood. Gordon, I would like to ask you to talk about Dr. Frederick Ordway. Can you talk about him?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to preface that by saying if Barry thinks I'm a fountain of UFO information, then I think of him as the Pacific Ocean of UFO information.
Good to know.
Okay.
I'll hit him with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I met Frederick Ordway in 1967. He had called up asking to meet with Kehoe. But Kehoe lived 100 miles away in Luray, Virginia, and couldn't get up there at the time that Ordway was there. And so Ordway took me out to lunch, and he said that Stanley Kubrick, who was doing the film, had a huge set I think it was in London, and he wanted to know why or how it could possibly be that astronauts could make long journeys into space and still be alive and well by the time they got there. And at the time, now remember this was in '67, when the idea of cryonic interment was first considered, and even the Ted Williams, a great baseball player, was cryonically interred. In other words, deep frozen, so that sometime in the future, when a cure for a particular disease was found, they could be thawed out and actually revived and brought back to life. Mm-hmm. Of course, that never happened. But the thing is that I mentioned that to Ordway. I mean, I told him that that one of the members of our subcommittee in Los Angeles was interested in the subject, a scientist out there, and that he could maybe talk with him. And my understanding was that Ordway flew out there, met with this person, and got some information on his ideas of how that might be possible in the future of using cryonic interment. And so that actually showed up in the first part of the film. Remember when after the Blue Danube Waltz stopped, then they focused in on the film and these astronauts opening coffin-like containers and arising out of them. And that was my minor contribution to the film, but I really enjoyed working with Ordway. And Ordway was the only scientist credited in that whole film. This was before the days today you have everybody, including the water boy, credited now. But that wasn't the case back then.
Did we even say the film was 2001: A Space Odyssey? We did say that, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, Gordon mentioned it.
Oh, okay. All right. I just
that was released
yeah.
April of 1968. Yeah, it's still considered by many to be the greatest sci-fi film ever made.
Yeah, I watched it like last year, and it still gave me like goosebumps. Certain scenes.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, and how the computer is almost scary. That was in the days long before there was any such thing as personal computers, of course.
Right, yeah, good stuff. Wow. So, Barry, your turn. I would like to ask you what you would consider, with all the research that you have done, what do you consider, you mentioned Socorro, but are there other cases that you consider of high value, really high value, like one of
yes. Any number of them that come to mind. I usually, when I do an interview with someone, the one that inevitably comes up is the Levelland, Texas story. And not for the reason that it's proof or evidence of extraterrestrial encounters, but just the sheer strangeness of the information and the credibility of it. It involved multiple sightings of anywhere from smallish to up to 200-foot egg-shaped objects that were being seen in different locations around the city. And it was during thunderstorm activity, so, the natural thing that would come to mind would be is some sort of natural electrical phenomenon, or ball lightning, in fact. And that seems to be what the Air Force felt about the sightings, but I think what escaped a lot of people at the time, and maybe even still does, is that to invoke ball lightning as an explanation for an aerial phenomenon is just as odd as suggesting that extraterrestrials were behind it, because ball lightning research is still looking for that one incident that's absolutely undeniable. There are many scientists that still doubt the existence of ball lightning, and it's been with us for hundreds of years. But rarely do you get detail, as was given in the Levelland story. At least it could be ball lightning. Maybe it's something more, especially with this alleged 200-foot object that was seen. That's pretty big, and it's way too big for ball lightning. But you have a minimal explanation as something that is considered very exotic and unusual in science. So for that reason alone... Yeah.
What's that, Gordon?
Yeah, I was going to add a little postscript to that, but go ahead, Barry. Didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Oh, no, I was just going to, conclude by saying the fact that the Air Force came to that conclusion is really unusual, and it should have spurred continuing research by the Air Force into incidents like that. And they came up from time to time. There's still a hefty number of unknowns in the Air Force's records, but that one in particular just caught my attention as almost undeniably real. That something was there, and it was really weird and strange. E.T., I don't know, but it was strange.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can follow up a little bit on that.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I have that Pedro Saucedo, he was a young farmhand, related his story about it. And I think, if I recall, Barry might correct me on this if I'm wrong, he says something to the effect that as the object left the area, it had created before EM effects, electromagnetic effects. He says, but when the object left the area, the truck lights resumed functioning, and he was able to restart the engine of his truck. And
that's exactly true. There were multiple reports, along with the sightings of multiple car ignition problems or electrical system problems.
Right. And Saucedo
that's another feature that was strange.
Right. Saucedo also added, quote, "It sounded like an ear-splitting clap of thunder, as if something had exploded." And then a patrolman named Fowler initially shrugged off the report because I thought the caller was drunk. But I don't think the caller was drunk. There was no indication that he was.
Yeah, that was on November 2nd, 1957, too.
Yeah, I have a full chapter in my book about that particular case. It's chapter 2. Yeah,
another thing, Gordon, is that if you go out and search the internet and look for Life magazine archives. I think Google does it, but they also have posted an archive of Life photos. If you enter flying saucers, you'll see a number of instances where Life reporters had gone out and taken pictures. Levelland was one of the stories they investigated, but they didn't write it up in the regular magazine. There's a collection of photographs with the witnesses there, and I recall one in particular showing a nighttime shot of Pedro Saucedo hiding under his truck, giving the impression of what happened at the time. He dove under the truck to get away from this. And those photos are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I want to add too that there was a tremendous amount of reporting, blazing headlines back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s on the tail end of the Kenneth Arnold sighting in 1947, which really ushered in the modern era of UFOs. And so that there were reports like that just kept the subject in the public mind. Today, however, you rarely see a headline in any newspaper because there's just so much other things going on out there, particularly after the advent of the Internet and everybody's personal computer.
Right.
So I think because there are a lot of people now that either don't care about the subject or have forgotten about it or are not interested in it in the first place.
Well, I have a theory on that, Gordon. I think the internet now is more or less taken over from the newspapers that we had.
Of
and
course,
the newspapers are shrinking in size, and it's harder to continue publishing. A lot of papers have gone under, but the internet has replaced it. And if you want to find UFO incidents, you go on the net and look at any number of sites that carry data about it.
That's right, and there are quite a few of them, including the NICAP website under Fran Ridge now, who was one of our subcommittee members back in the 60s, yeah.
Yeah, we talk a lot of times on the show about sometimes there's just there's a lot of what they call clickbait. In other words, UFOs is one of the top searched things on the internet. It's not too far from the top, I should say. And so a lot of these English tabloids will use, they'll take something and make it into something else and make it spectacular for what they call clickbait. And so a lot of people landing on their website, that's what they want the most. So, yeah,
there was a time, I think in 1977, TV Guide took a survey as to what generated the most ratings for television, what topics would be the most useful for that. And the top two in order were sex and UFOs. So if you take either one or combine the two especially, you're going to have bang-up ratings.
Because it's going to have a bang-up rating, yeah.
That's right, yeah.
So we digress. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to ask both of you also, I wanted to say that this show is dedicated to Stanton Friedman. So I just wanted to ask, I'll start with you, Gordon. Did you ever meet Stan?
I never met him face to face, but he was very helpful to me because I had contact with him back in NICAP days and all through my U4. I didn't have much contact with him, but occasional. Matter of fact, when I first set up U4, he wished me very well, and he sent in what he called a review copy of Flying Saucers 4 scientific papers by nuclear physicist lecturer Stanton T. Friedman. They were the Science Fiction, Science and UFOs 1977, Fiction, Fact, and Flying Saucers 1979, A Scientific Approach to Flying Saucers Behavior 1973, and The Case for the ET Origin of Flying Saucers in 1979. I had periodic contact with him off and on, but nothing in depth. I wish I had met him, though.
Yeah. Yeah, he was very available at a lot of conferences. It just seemed like wherever I went there, he was, which was always great. Now, Barry, we had a little bit of an email exchange. I know there was a little bit of friction there when it comes to MJ12, and I had questioned Stan on those documents a little bit, but you knew him a long time. That being said,
I was aware of Stan for a lot of years before the '80s came along, and if one thing about Stan is he was one of the most spirited, energetic advocates of the ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis of just about anyone out there, save maybe Kehoe, McDonald, and a few others. But he put a lot of energy into the subject over the years, and I thought that was really cool. Then when the '80s rolled around, he got into Roswell and MJ12, and I had been observing that from afar too for a while, and then suddenly I found myself in the middle of it. I just wasn't convinced by MJ12 at all, and that was based upon the research that myself and Larry Fawcett and several other people, Brad Sparks, Bob Todd, Todd Zeckel, on FOIA releases, and we didn't think that the information coming out about MJ12 rose up to the standards of what we expected out of real government document releases. I realized that given the write-ups on Roswell beginning around 1978 and then culminating in a book by Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz, the Roswell incident, that there was a certain version of Roswell that I think Stan and Bill adhered to. And it seemed too much of a coincidence that when the MJ12 papers broke, that seemed to more or less confirm their version of the story, even though there were several others. Now, I can't go into all the details about how that evolved over many, many years. There's a vast amount of information out there on it, back and forth, but I just felt that the story of MJ12 was too pat with their version of Roswell, and it seemed manufactured, and as I later found out, there was more evidence that it was manufactured. At one point, before the whole thing became public, there was a story about several people, including Moore, co-authoring a fiction novel, which was essentially the blueprint for MJ12. That would have been around 1982 or so, and it took many, many years to try to flesh out detail on that, but there was a fiction novel, and it did outline MJ12 before it was touted as real. It just bothered me that there were too many issues like that, and I went at it with Stan over the years on it, and published a lot of information about it, but that's what happened, and it's unfortunate that Stan's gone now. It's too bad. I don't like to see that happen. We lose people on the subject, but no, it's my condolences to his family on it.
Right.
Absolutely. Can I add a short paragraph?
Oh,
yeah. About that?
Doesn't have to be even short. Yeah, sure.
Well, the purpose of MJ12 was to investigate the crash of the alien spacecraft near Roswell. Documents associated with it are said to have confirmed that the American government was extensively involved in the retrieval of a crashed ET craft, including the occupants. Assorted documents released from non-official sources were directly on target to create a lingering firestorm among UFO investigators. As promising as this sounded, there were serious problems with the story, and particularly with the documents themselves. So just to follow up on what Barry was saying.
Yeah. So do you, well, I'll ask you this, Barry. Do you have another thought of what Roswell is? I mean, the argument I give, and my listeners have heard me say it a million times, is the one argument, or if there is an argument at all, we have someone trying to call in. Hang on just a minute, and we'll take calls in a bit here. But my argument as that there is something to it, or whatever there is to it, but the government actually released to the press that they captured a flying disc, and my question is, why did they even do that? They could have just let the whole thing blow over. It's really a strange situation.
Well, I think one thing a lot of people don't recognize about Roswell in that era is that Roswell happened then at the very tail end of a large UFO wave. It wasn't the first thing that happened or the only thing that happened. It was right. I think at the first breaking of news on it was July 8th, 47, and all the papers carried it on July 9th, and just as quickly at the same time said it was a weather balloon, and dismissed it that way.
Yeah, I think, Barry, it was only about a month or so after the Kettle Barnell sighting, wasn't it?
It was
just a matter of
weeks.
Just a matter of weeks.
Yeah, it was just weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But it was at the tail end, so it was like the culmination of that wave, and then from that point on to about 1978 or so, it was never regarded as anything special. It was always put into the category of an identified object, and that was the end of it.
Yeah. Do you guys?
What Stanton Friedman regurgitated. I didn't mean to say regurgitated, but brought up the case again that it really hit all the news.
Right.
What Stan did was he was able to contact Jesse Marcel Jr., who was definitely involved in the story. He was positively part of it, and he told a pretty lurid tale about his involvement, which got Stan's interest, and that's how the story began rolling. I take Roswell and do it in two parts. There's the early Roswell, and then there's a later Roswell, which was 30 years after the original. And I like to go with the original story more so than a 30-year recollection. And the original report was Mac Brazel found a pile of debris. It was described very well in the paper. They didn't have any photographs of it, except there was one in the news coverage of July 9th, which showed General Ramey and Irving Newton, who was a weather officer at the time, posing with debris. And the debris there looked a lot like what they described in the paper. And
it was everything you could find on Earth, too, you know.
It hardly looked like extraterrestrial debris, but that wasn't the point they were making at the time. They were saying it was just balloon debris, and that was the end of it. Only later did all the extraterrestrial business come out, but then you were 3 decades removed from the original story, and it was impossible to verify it.
Well, I don't want to say argument, but my thoughts on that is that you didn't have witnesses come forward when it first happened. You know, it was that people were told to keep quiet, and the witnesses came out after. We have actually a caller on the line. He was persistent in calling. I'll call your first name, and where are you calling from?
Hey, Martin, it's Dean Aliotto. How are you?
Oh, Dean. Hi, Dean. Dean was on the show years ago. He has quite an interesting story himself. Just quickly, Dean, tell the story about the film you made real quickly and how it went, just for entertainment for these gentlemen, if you would.
Sure, I'll try to be as brief as possible because I do not want to co-opt the great Stanton Friedman's memory here. I had I'd just come out of film school and was desperate to make my first feature, and the only thing that I could do with the amount of budget that I had, which was $6,500, was a home video. So I made the first ever found footage film. That happened to be about UFOs. It was about a family that gets abducted by extraterrestrials. I had been a big fan of Whitley Strieber's work and Bud Hopkins, and that bled into the actual authenticity of the film. And this film that I'd done actually got distributed, and the distribution company burned to the ground. And I thought, well, that was it. That's my first effort. Time to move on. And I'm glad I got a chance to portray as realistic as possible what that abduction experience would be like without actually being abducted. And 5 years goes by, and then I find out that someone much more clever than I am had edited off the credits and passed it around the UFO community as the real McCoy. So it ends up at the International UFO Congress Convention about 30 years ago. And it is 25 years ago, actually the anniversary was. And it becomes this kind of big conspiracy hit, if you will. And UPN TV asked me to remake it. So I remade it this time, and as a TV movie, and shot the film. And while we were shooting, everyone at UPN got fired. So this woman came on board to cut the film from an hour, or from 2 hours to 1 hour, and she went and interviewed all of these UFO luminaries, and then intercut them into my remake, which I had, nothing to do with the actual footage that she shot. One of those people was Stanton Friedman, and so Stanton's commenting on the phenomenon, as kind of in generic terms, and the juxtaposition between his interview and as well as Yvonne Smith and Daryl Sim and a few others, he was relating to my film. So that and Coast to Coast was also, commented on that. And so I got a chance last year for the 25th anniversary to meet Stanton. And I came up to him and I, mea culpa, I said, look, I want you to know that I'm terribly sorry that thing that happened many years ago. And I'm sorry, and I have nothing but respect for you, and you've been nothing but a great advocate for the field like no one, standing up against Philip Glass and everything else he's done, and, as well as bringing credible science and great arguments to it. And he looked at me and he said, I have no idea what you're talking about, son. I've worked on probably, I can't even keep track of how many, thousands of interviews I've done. But, no offense here. And so that meeting happened on Martin's show at the International Congress Convention live. And so I found him nothing but a sweet man who genuinely had interest and was always sharpening his tools to get to the truth of anything regarding this, field.
Well, Dean, that's great. I really thank you for the call. That's a real nice tribute to Stan.
Well, he was a great man.
Yeah.
Well, what was the name of the film? Does it go by a current name that we can find out about?
Sure. You can actually pick up the film. You can actually get a copy at UFOabductionmovie.com. And so the original is called UFO Abduction. The remake is called Alien Abduction Incident in Lake County. And that was... there was also, it goes by, if you look at it online, it goes by the McPherson tape. And my version is for sale. I don't know if you can actually get the remake that I did for Dick Clark and UPN. I get a copy of that. But
well, one funny story in this whole incident that he's talking about in the film is that he has actually had people argue with him that film was real, and someone said they even knew the McPhersons, right?
Yeah, I had someone that said to me when I was presenting, lecturing at the UFO convention last year, they said, I know someone or my mother knows someone who knew the McPherson family. How do you explain that they never talked to them again? And that they disappeared. And I said, I can't explain why your mother knew someone who was good friends with a fictional character. I can't really help you out there.
Yeah.
But I'm the only one who's been outing myself because, you go online and there's all these conspiracies about it, and that I worked for the government, part of a disinformation. And usually it goes the other way, but I'm showing behind the scenes pictures and everything saying, guys, just to, get my first film done and become a filmmaker.
Yeah. That's a great story. Hey, Dean, thanks for the call. Thanks.
You got it. Thank you, Martin, for great work as well.
All right. You take care.
Take care, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.
That was pretty funny, huh? So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think I seem to remember that story a while back. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
It's interesting
the one
because.
question I have
Go ahead. Yeah.
about the Socorro case, it seems like everything that was picked up off the ground, you could find almost anywhere,
Are you talking about Roswell? Roswell, you mean?
Roswell.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roswell. Well, I just wonder why that was taken so much as being something from outer space. I never been able to figure that out.
Well, I think.
I think I can answer that. At the time, it wasn't taken as something from outer space, but over time,
Yeah, I realize.
it became that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to admit the press release.
Yeah.
The press release kind of steered it toward something extraterrestrial. When it said flying disc caught in Roswell or whatever, captured or whatever it said.
That only lasted for a matter of hours, and then shortly after, that was thoroughly trashed. And they went with the balloon explanation. I mean,
Okay.
I think anyone reading the papers on July 8th would have been fooled by it, but on July 9th, that was dead.
Okay, but let's think about this logically too. Why would they say that, first of all? And are you telling me that someone in the Army Air Force at the time didn't know what they were looking at?
I don't think a lot of people, even military, knew what the phenomenon was all about at all. It was a very strange development when the saucer reports first broke, and even the military was baffled as to what was responsible for it. The sightings were happening by the thousands all over the place.
No, you're missing my point.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, my point is the fact that the Army Air Force themselves, if they came upon the debris field or anyone that went forward with the press release or was involved with the press release, are you telling me that they wouldn't know what they were looking at?
Well, the people who issued the press release, I don't think were out in the field seeing this. They were being told what happened.
By people that looked at it.
By people that went out and gathered this debris, which again was described in the papers as sticks and rubberized material and tape, floured tape.
Okay, well, the point I'm trying to get at is where did the flying saucer or captured disc come from then?
The captured disc came 30 years later.
No. It was released on the day.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that the debris that was found clearly wasn't flying disc debris. The guys that were given that story read into it that it was some kind of a flying disc, but the material itself wasn't extraterrestrial at the time. So they issued this story, but it almost immediately had to retract it.
Okay, so where was the miscommunication? Where you think of the miscommunication began?
Between the folks that gathered the debris and the people who issued statements about it. I don't think Jesse Marcel authored any of the statements that were released to the press. That was done by Walter Haut. I don't think he saw the debris at the time.
Yeah, but someone of some authority had to say, this is what we found. And the person that is going to do the press release, I don't think would be the person making the decision to call it a flying disc. So we can plainly disagree on this.
It was clearly a foul-up to call it a flying disc, because that's not what the debris shows.
Well, that's quite a big jump and quite a big foul-up, if you ask me. I mean, it doesn't seem
it is
possible
that whole era was replete with foul-ups.
Right. Yeah. By the way, I was wondering, Martin, if I could read do it have about 5 minutes? I can read you a little section in my book here about what Major Kehoe actually thought.
I really don't like reading on my show too much, but if you can kind of give a overview of it, if you would, please.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I was Kehoe kept the subject of the abduction and even occupant cases silent from NICAP until 1969, when I wrote the book Strange Effects From UFOs, which NICAP published. But I asked him one time what he thought. Had alien beings from other planets been observing and monitoring all these years? And he said he had no doubt about it, and that I had probably seen by now a lot of information confirming it, and we will see a lot more, he said, particularly if our work with the Colorado folks, the University of Colorado folks, continues and is successful. And he says, but tell me, do you think that officials at the highest level of government, including President Johnson, known we are being observed by aliens from outer space? Yes, I have no doubt about it, he responded. Was this confirmed by Admiral Hillenkoetter or anyone else? Now, Admiral Hillenkoetter and Keogh were close friends of the Naval Academy, and Hillenkoetter became the first director of the CIA. But the major responded to my question, you're not going to catch me there. I can't say, of course. So that's it.
Yeah, wow. We have a caller's going to be calling in just a second here. He just texted me that he's calling in, and it's Lee Spiegel, and here he is. I think this is him. Lee, is that you?
It is.
Hi, Lee. Thanks for calling in. Lee Spiegel, I want you to meet the guests that we have tonight. We have Gordon Lore and Barry Greenwood.
Barry Greenwood and I go back many, 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 many decades. How are you, Barry?
Yes. Yeah. Hi, Lee. How you doing? I remember you on the radio in New York City, right?
Yeah. Yes, on NBC many years ago.
Yeah.
How are you? Yeah.
That was about the time when Clear Intent came out.
That was exactly the time. Yes, I remember the blue and white cover.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Have you ever spoken with Gordon Lore before?
No, I haven't. Nice to meet you, Gordon.
Well, nice to meet you. Very good. Yeah, my book, Flying Saucers from Beyond the Earth, has a nice blue and white cover, too.
Oh, God. Excellent.
Well, Lee,
Not that I make a plug for my book, but I am.
That's okay.
Yeah. So, Lee, I asked you to call in because this show is dedicated to Stanton Friedman, and we were talking about him. We just got into a pretty good discussion about Roswell, but you missed that. So I know you're on the train, but thanks for calling in. Do you want to give your little say about Stanton?
You know, Stan Friedman was the first person who I ever interviewed about anything.
Really?
And it just happened to be, it was in 1975, and I was just beginning work on what would then become my documentary UFO, it was a documentary vinyl album. Are we all old enough to remember vinyl records, guys?
Yes.
I did this for CBS in 1975, and the name of the album was UFOs, The Credibility Factor. And the very first person I interviewed for the album was Stan Friedman. And at the time, he and his wife Marilyn were living out, I want to say Redondo Beach, California, but I'm not sure. It's one of those beaches in that area. And he agreed to let me come to his house, and I interviewed him. And I was instantly struck by he was obviously a scientist. And at that point in my life, I had not met a lot of scientists yet. He was the first, and he was actually very closely followed by my second scientist, which was, of course, J. Allen Hynek. But I got Stan first, and he always came across, and always since then, in all of his lectures, in all of his presentations, in all of his radio and television interviews, always came across as the diligent, best researcher out there, I thought. He never wavered from his commitment to find some kind of evidence, and then hopefully that would lead to truth. He would never speculate. He would only go for something which he felt he had enough evidence based on his own research. He was an amazing researcher. And I was always so impressed by the fact that even when he moved to Fredericton up in Canada, every time he had to go on a speaking engagement somewhere, anywhere, whether just in the United States or in Canada or in any other country, he always had to take like a minimum of 5 or 6 flights to get there. And he never complained. He was always going through the airports by himself, with his rolling bags. And he was just amazing. He always had an amazing amount of energy. I was so proud about 4 years ago to give him the Lifetime Achievement Award at the International UFO Congress when it was in the Scottsdale area.
Yeah.
And I was so happy to go on stage to give that to him and to see the sparkle in his eyes for that thing, for that achievement.
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying. Up on YouTube, I'm playing a slideshow which will show show you handing them that presentation. Actually.
Oh, yes. Excellent. I wonder if you even. Yes.
Do you remember the TV show Have Gun Will Travel?
Of course. With
Stan Friedman. Yeah. Stan Friedman was E.T. Will Travel.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. Everywhere he went, he was always just lugging that rolling suitcase. I think he was one of the first persons who I met who actually owned one of those rolling suitcases that now everybody owns.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
right.
He used it so much he got a flat tire.
I'm not surprised. I will tell you, when I was on NBC, and in my final 4 years there, I was the host of a show called The Edge of Reality, and which I am actually going to be soon bringing to KGRA Digital Radio. We don't know the exact date yet, but I will come on Martin's show at his great invitation, and we'll talk about all the things that I plan on doing with the show, bringing it back to radio. But what I used to do, at least a few times a year on Edge of Reality, I would host a debate between Stan Friedman and Phil Glass.
Wow.
And both men eagerly agreed to do it whenever I called them and said, "You guys ready for another debate?" And they always jumped on it. And I have to say, I kept score, and Stan always came out on top because, in my opinion, he was a better researcher than Phil Glass. Phil Glass, I think, took pride in the fact that he was a debunker. But as Stan always liked to point out, the debunkers just don't always do their homework. They don't finish their homework so that they can have a valid opinion about UFOs. Stan, on the other hand, was that kind of researcher. And I was always amazed. He could hold his own against anybody in any kind of a debate. Oh, there was nobody better than him in a debate, I thought.
Yeah, Alejandro and I were talking about that earlier in the show. Alejandro was actually bringing up how great he was in a debate, and I mentioned the latest one I saw was with Jeremy Corbell. I thought he did an excellent job there as well.
Oh.
Yeah, about Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
I know.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gordon here. I just wanted to add to that. One of the few times I talked with Stan was this. He was just warning me that be very careful and always do your homework before you get on these
that sounds like him.
TV and radio.
Yeah, excellent.
And Stan did do that. He really knew what he was talking about.
Yeah.
I always quote Stan wherever I am in any kind of a situation where I'm talking to people to kind of get them to see a different point of view about UFOs. And he always loved to say, among other things, that there was a mantra that the debunkers always had about UFOs. And here's that mantra. And somebody says that bit of UFO behavior is impossible, what they're really saying is, I don't know how to do that. And so if I don't know how to do it, it must be impossible. Nobody else knows how to do it either.
That's right.
I mean, wow.
Yeah.
And I've come to refer to that as what I call the SETI syndrome. Because that's what the SETI, as in SETI, the SETI syndrome, because their basic attitude is Their attitude is, well, we really think that there's no evidence that indicates that Earth is being visited by anyone, and so we're going to continue to use what little funding we can get to try and find that cosmic needle in a haystack, because we know that we really believe that 20 years from now we're gonna find that signal, and we'll refer to it as like the hello signal again, and then we'll try and respond to it in some way, and we'll have a conversation that will last thousands of years and will get us nowhere. I once had a kind of an argument, a friendly argument, with Frank Drake, the creator of SETI, and I said to Frank, is there any part of you that would consider that maybe some people out there who have reported UFOs through the decades, maybe some of them aren't kooks or hallucinating or you're having mental breakdowns? Isn't it possible? And he said, well, I haven't seen any evidence. No one has presented any evidence to me that I would consider worth studying. And I said, Frank, they're landing in people's backyards. You know, and he said, well, they didn't land in my backyard, so until I can see something that I can, support, then as far as I'm concerned, we're going to still look for those cosmic signals. Like, okay, fine.
Bang your head on the wall. Hey, Lee, thanks so much for the call. And I'm so glad you announced your show, because I was trying to figure out a way to announce it, and if I had permission to announce it. So you are going to be coming up on the show. We'll be hosting you here before that launches, and we'll talk all about it. I'm really, really looking forward to it.
And I'm looking forward to. And again, it's a very sad day for all of us about dear old Stan.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the call. All right.
Bye.
Bye now. So the line is open, and I know you gentlemen have a lot more to say. And with that being said, I would definitely want you back on the show again so we can talk some more. But I do want to actually leave the line open for if anyone has a story about Stanton Friedman or a really fond memory. I want you to give us a call here at 603-967-4030. You can see the number up on YouTube if you're watching YouTube. But before, right when I was taking the call from Lee, we kind of varied off of the Roswell subject, and we're moving on to something else. Any particular sighting or that really you would like to talk about more? I did get your overall view of Roswell. We'll move on from that, but I just wanted to know if there's another sighting that you really thought there was a lot to it. I have what I feel are some top sightings. I think the Phoenix Lights is pretty important. I think these are just my own opinions. I'm not asking you to join me. I think Rendlesham Forest is right up there. There's a number of them that I think are pretty amazing, and the Chicago O'Hare UFO. Those are all ones that are kind of I think pretty credible. Either one want to take that?
Go ahead, Gordon.
I was going to maybe go back to, I was on with John Fuller, author of The Interrupted Journey, about
Betty and Barney Hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
On Joe Franklin's show in New York back in the 60s, and I would credit that as one of the really spectacular cases. NICAP did a tremendous amount of investigating on that, and but again, Kehoe held it back because of his concern that Congress would not hold future hearings on it. But anyhow, I think that was the case, which I think everybody knows well. Barry can add something about it. But,
well, for now, as I mentioned, we're going to be taking calls, and we do have one that came in. We'll get back to that conversation in a minute. Call your first name and where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Joe. I'm calling from Central Connecticut.
Hi, did you say Joe?
Yeah, I did.
Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you. Do you want to make a comment about Stan, or did you have a question for our guests?
I have a memory of Stan, and I'd just like to say, Martin, that I love your show. You've got a great approach on the whole subject, and it's a pleasure to listen to you.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure. About 5 years ago, I had a burning desire to ask an expert about one of the questionable personalities in the UFO world. And I found Stan Friedman's email info on the internet and just randomly asked him a very simple question about this particular person. Is the story legit? And I mean, within half a day, he got back to me with a very thorough, in-depth answer. And I always remembered that, and I thought it was a really stand-up thing to do, to find the time. I know he's a busy guy. I know he's always traveling, and he's in high demand. And I just thought that it was a great thing for him to just say, I don't buy into it. And he, said, it's up to you to make your own mind up, but he didn't buy into it. So therefore I didn't buy into it, because I thought he was just, the elder statesman of the subject. And that's my memory. I'm sad to see him go, and he'll be missed. Yeah,
Joe, I agree. And I'm almost dying to ask you who that person is, but I'm not going to, and I don't want to know. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the call and the memory. And that is, that is something about Stan. He did get back. He did get back to people, and can you imagine his email box? How many emails that he got from all over the world?
Exactly.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. I think he's gone. So,
can I add something?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure, Gordon.
Not to that specifically, but I just wanted to say that if we could get just a couple of minutes in on Barry and others in the field who are really archiving this subject and going to people's homes like mine, and just scanning through boxes and warehouses full of material for safekeeping for future investigators and researchers.
I should get you together with David Marler. David Marler is doing the same thing out in he's not far from Socorro. He's out in the Albuquerque area. He's
good. That's where I did a lot of my research.
I will definitely connect you to. But go ahead, Barry. I want to hear more about what you're doing.
I mean, after a long period of time in the subject, I realized that we had to get all the information together in one place. It tended to be scattered around among investigators and lecturers and organizations, and everybody had their own pile to deal with, and no pile exactly duplicated the other. So it seemed like all of that information had to be put in one place, and I instituted an effort, which I call preservation and duplication, to try to save the subject. Too many times, and I could rattle off a number of examples where records were lost. People's investigative files were trashed. Others took the files over and disappeared with them, never to be seen again. The old Aerial Phenomena Research Organization files disappeared 30 years ago, and I tend to think they're still around, but they're in the hands of people that aren't allowing outsiders to see them, and it makes them fairly useless for research. Fortunately, the people who had the files at the time, Coral and Jim Lorenzen, had made some microfilms of their files, but I think there's only one surviving right now. If there were others around, I'd like to know about it. But the point is that if this subject's going to survive, if the scarce information within it is going to survive, it has to be, number one, identified and preserved, and then two, duplicated into multiple locations, so that if any one of those drops off the radar, other people will have the data, and it just won't become permanently unattainable.
Yeah,
so that's been my effort, and I travel around trying to copy things as much as I can.
Yeah, Yeah, I want to add too that Barry has written a excellent postscript to my future book I'm working with Erica Lukes on that topic called archiving the UFO topic. He's done a marvelous job.
Yeah, I'm sure you both have heard about the Project Blue Book files that were being sold at on Craigslist at like an estate sale. I don't know if you heard about that years ago.
Oh yeah, that was Sergeant Morano, wasn't it?
I think it was him that it originated from, I believe, in the out in Ohio. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had seen that when it surfaced, and I was fascinated with it because usually Blue Book files aren't out of the system, except in rare circumstances. But that was a whole stash that Morano had kept, and he made them available, and fortunately they survive now.
Yeah, it's amazing. And they're actually at Dave Marler's archive out in New Mexico that I spoke to you about, and I'll definitely be talking to you more about that, Barry. You know, we only got a minute left, so if there's any burning desire for anything else either one of you would like to say, one at a time. Gordon, do you have anything? We have just less than a minute left here. You have a...
No, I don't think I have a postscript to it. I think it's... I think you've done a wonderful job with the show, and hopefully some people will take notice and begin saving whatever UFO materials they have, so they can survive into the future.
Right. All right.
I regret that I do that. I was one of the great fault about that, but I was so fed up particularly after I was fired from Nightcap, that I got rid of much more information than I still have.
Wow. All right, you two, I have to go, so that's the end of the show. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. All right, everyone, so that is it for this show. I want to thank you all for listening, and this show, again, is dedicated to Stanton Friedman, and he will be greatly missed. Next week, we have MJ Benias on. He's always a treat, and I do want to thank everyone that helps out and supports the show, and we'll be back next week, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.
What?